All right. Hello, we're back here again for Classic Car Restoration Club Live. And with me again today during our COVID special is Gary. Gary, a little bit of history. If you're not familiar from past with Gary, Gary's a graduate of Wyotech. He's worked for a number of top name shops for metal fabrication, chassis fabrication, engine upholstery, great upholstery. He's done most of the cars here. So he's got plenty of credentials. If you have any questions, right down below here, there's a comments area, not the green little chat button off to the side. If you click on that, then you're going to get the member services. So the questions really need to go down below here. So that way, me and Gary can respond to them. If you click on the chat button over to the side, over to your right side, then you'll get to talk to a member services representative, and it'll take, a week or no, it'll take a little time before I'm sure member services right now is like ready to chuck me, but they usually respond to your questions right away, but it won't get directed to me right away. So if you want to talk to us today, it's in the comment section below. Again, me and Gary's my son, so we're sheltering in place sort of together. So our fates are eternally tied, so that's why we're not in masks and not
6 feet apart.
6 feet apart. So we've already acknowledged our fates are uniquely tied together. But moving forward, let's get going, guys. I know you got a ton of questions out there. It's been a while since we've been on the air. We had a few technical problems. We're kind of getting over. We got a little bit better camera this time. Next time, we're going to have even a better camera. We have a virtual car show event coming up, next week, I think it is, or maybe, there's some information coming out about that, which we're going to be kind of, trying something new. If it's a big hit, we'll, see if we can do more of that kind of thing. Always love seeing you guys' cars. Always love seeing what you guys are up to. Moving to the top. Guest says, what all will I need to change my 55 Chevy from an automatic to a 4-speed? It depends on the clutch you want. If you're running a hydraulic clutch as opposed to a manual linkage clutch, that makes a difference. You're going to need.
If you're talking about a 3 on the tree, like a factory transmission, or if you're talking about cutting a hole.
Yeah, most guys are going to drop it in the floor, have some kind of floor linkage set up. So if it's a 55 Chevy, they all have 4-speed shifters in the floor. Just kidding. You're going to need a shifter and linkage, of course, and then you're going to need to be able to operate the clutch. How your clutch is operated, there's a number of different ways to get the clutch to work, both hydraulic and mechanical. I don't necessarily have everything. You'll need a flywheel. You'll need to replace your flex plate and drop on a flywheel. You need to a lot of engines require I can't remember if it's an shape, but I'm pretty sure it is. There's a bronze bearing in the end of the crankshaft that needs to be present on a manual transmission. There's a few things like that you're gonna need. There's a ton of stuff on the internet about it as far as making the changeover. I know a lot of guys like the hydraulic clutch kind of operation, just because it gets rid of all the linkage troubles. And it's like most modern cars now, a lot of them operate with a hydraulic clutch, and it's a lot more solid, gets rid of all the adjustments and stuff needed there. Robert, I'm currently doing a frame-off restoration on a 69 Triumph TR6. I'm ready to start reassembly and would like suggestions on how to coat against rust. The original chassis and suspension bolts, how how to coat against rust the original chassis and suspension bolts after media blasting. Oh, to coat those? Well, to coat bolts. Usually when you get the bolts, you don't want to mess. You don't want a lot of coating on the thread. So a lot of times, yeah, you can do like sacrificial coatings, like you have them send them out to them zinc plated. There's not a lot of places that do that. What most guys will do is, they'll either powder coat or paint the heads on the bolts, and then use like some oil on the bolts themselves, and keep them from rusting that way. Um, if you do choose to, the best thing to do with your chassis is to have it powder coated, but usually then you have to go through and chase all the threaded holes with a tap to clean the powder coating out of the threads. Right. So
they don't jam the bolts in, because you'll run into problems.
Yeah, if you just start jamming bolts into powder coated holes, they tend to bind up, and then all of a sudden you're snapping bolts off in the frame. You got a whole new problem to deal with, and it's easy outing.
Yeah, same thing. If you paint it, go back through and chase all your threads.
Exactly. Even I've seen guys paint stuff, put enough paint on stuff so the bolt holes are almost like gone. So yeah, anytime you paint like a chassis or anything where there's threaded holes, you should always go back and just, you don't have to cut new threads. You're just chasing the threads. You're just chasing the paint out of those. So it shouldn't feel like you're just grinding, cutting all brand new threads. But
right. And that's something you should be doing anyways. Just making sure that there wasn't something that was cross-threaded before, and you're grabbing, freshly zinc bolts and running them in. Go ahead and chase those threads on everything, where you're not just jamming bolts into where they came out of and running into problems with accidentally crossing the threads or locking that bolt up. And, always on suspension bolts, add a little blue Loctite, or, anti-seize in areas where you need to be, to make sure that you're going to be able to get those fasteners out, or you want those fasteners to stay in.
And it's especially true, little anti-seize if you're going to be if you're going to be bolting. Sometimes a lot of guys will replace some of the bolts with stainless steel bolts. Stainless steel bolts.
Oh, yes.
Stainless steel
bolts. Dissimilar metals will give you trouble. So
stainless steel bolts have a lot of nickel and chromium in them, and they'll have a tendency to gall easily just from the friction of putting them in. And as soon as they gall, the threads are messed up. You're not going to be able to go in and out without tearing everything up. Good idea using stainless bolts. Just keep a little tube. Yeah, I know the anti-seize gets a bad name because as soon as you open the bottle,
everything you own is covered in it. But they do have a new glue stick that's available where you can get it just on the threads and run it in without getting it everywhere, instead of having the big jar in the tub.
Yep. And I highly recommend. We switched to using the little sticks here in the shop, and we still have our big bottle of anti-seize, but it seldom gets used because nobody wants it all over their tools, their toolbox, their car, their interior, the wife's couch, and anything else that it should get near. It's surprising where anti-seize won't go, but yeah, for sure, if you're going to have, it's not a bad idea to put a little anti-seize on your bolts. That ensures you can get them out. And it also, it helps prevent some corrosion too. Yep. And, but I don't really strongly recommend powder coating the whole threaded area of bolts and stuff. That's just crazy. You're asking for trouble. Is your preference, this is from Jan, is your preference for welding, what is your preference for welding on panels? I've seen all being used. Old school guys seem to prefer oxyacetylene, since does not put as much heat, preventing washing, I'm thinking he means warping, does not need as much filler wire, if any. Well, Gary, you got a good guy here to answer this. Gary is our metal master.
Oxyacetylene is, what was used back in the 50s and the 60s before, the introduction of wire feed welders and, the availability of stuff like that. And oxyacetylene is a great choice, but it does introduce a lot more heat to the panel. Your heat effect zone is going to be much larger using oxyacetylene. The difference between that and the MIG welding is such an instantaneous heating and cooling of the metal, where the weld itself is brittle. Anytime you're welding on metal, it heats up and it contracts, and when it contracts, it shrinks. And when you're talking about butt welding panels together, that becomes a problem when you're trying to hammer and dolly and trying to stretch that heat effect zone out. I TIG weld everything together. I can change the heat, just my weld penetration, where I can get in there and weld it, hammer and dolly all day long, and I don't have problems with the weld cracking, as well as I have better control of my heat effect zone, where I'm not heating up so much metal as if I was oxyacetylene versus TIG welding. I could narrow it down to, less than a half of an inch.
And from a hobbyist perspective, I know TIG welding can be overwhelming because it takes you a while to learn how to do it. And everybody I know that has been resistant to learning TIG welding has, they've said, well, geez, it takes a while to learn because I need to use one hand to fill rod and I need another hand to control the torch. And then I have to operate how much heat I have by actually pressing a pedal or using a thumb screw on the torch or some other means to control the actual amount of heat. And so it is a bit of a skill, but again, it's no different than gas oxyacetylene welding, where you're going to control how much heat you have by running turning up your torch. You're going to have a torch, you're going to have a fill rod. It's the same mentality that goes into it.
We're just adding a pedal.
And because TIG welding, you can control the on off. You can fluctuate the arc. You have so much more control. TIG welding. Think of TIG welding as just a form of oxyacetylene welding, just because you've got your heat source, but you've got a much more controlled heat source. And the difference is when Gary's done welding two pieces of sheet metal together, there may be a half inch of bluing around the weld, a quarter inch on both sides. Where on MIG welding, it'll be much wider. It may be an inch and a half. And on oxyacetylene, it can really get away from you because you can't turn that. You can't just let your foot off the heat pedal and have no power there. You've got this flame that's constantly there. So yeah, I understand why the old schoolers, TIG welders were years ago were frightfully expensive. You would spend, $5,000, $6,000, $8,000 for one, but now they're so cheap and so readily available and hobbyist friendly. It's your money ahead if you learn how to use one. Because then not only can you weld steel, you can weld aluminum, you can weld stainless, you can weld anything that you want. You can weld copper if you want, if you're that insane to try it, but it can be done. So, a TIG welder is a good investment, and that's probably the best route to go. You could do it, I know they have, like with oxyacetylene, they have like that little mini torch, the Henrob torch that makes it a very fine flame, so you can control the heat a lot more. That may be a route you go if you don't want to really get into the TIG welders, but I would strongly recommend going TIG weld. Let's see. We have a guest, and his question is, hello, I recently installed a 5-speed Gatreg tranny 50, I'm sorry.
78 BMW.
Oh, in a 78 BMW 530. It was supposedly rebuilt. It shifts smooth, very quiet, but it has a slow leak. There were a few not tight bolts in it. It has showed the It has slowed the leak, but it has not stopped. I'm using a generic automatic transmission fluid along with a purple brand. Is there something you could suggest to remedy this? It and now you're going to get into my weak spot is BMWs. We recently just tore one completely apart, and we fought with it for 2 years.
Can't explain that German
I
engineering.
yeah, I'll admit, we're into one of those areas where I show my weaknesses. But it sounds to me, you've still got a leak somewhere in the system, and like anything, it's figuring out what exactly is leaking. And of course, my experience on BMW is there's not an absolute bit of room to actually figure out where anything's leaking. But this is just my personal opinion. The I would say, your number one goal is just to figure out where it's leaking. Something's not right. It could be a bad seal, could be a seal that was damaged when it was put together. It could be a bolt that's still loose. It could be, is there a I'm not a big
Wherever
proponent.
it's leaking, just put a fresh piece of cardboard underneath there, and that way you can diagnose
Yeah.
exactly where you're leaking.
Or it can be like our 57 DeSoto here, where it leaks in one spot and then drips, like 3 feet over because it runs along the transmission and then falls down. But I'm not a big advocate of pour in solutions. If you have I know there's a number of, if you go to an auto parts store, there's an endless array of, transmission
Miracle cures in a
stop
can.
leaks and stuff like that. 99% of the time, these aren't going to work, or there'll be a short-term fix, and it's what the used car dealers put in to get the car down the road. And so it's not really a remedy to the problem. It's a short-term fix. I guess the biggest my best advice for you is the best fix for a leak is to repair the leak. And it may take some time, or and even for me, sometimes I'll be chasing some leak somewhere, and you'll be like going, geez, I can't figure it out. And it doesn't hurt to get, another set of eyes to look at it, and I'll get like, some fellow car buddies and say, hey, take a look at this. I can't figure out where it's leaking. I know I have a leak and I've repaired everything. I know that's leaking, but I just can't nail it down. So, it doesn't hurt to ask your friends for a little bit of help once in a while. What's your thought about paint shops going to latex-based paints? Ooh, Gary's a painter.
But I'm thinking
about
latex.
They have gone to.
I've never heard that. I've heard water-based.
That may be what they're referring to as the water-based paints. And the water-based paints are, if you remember, the water-based paint thing is coming out of Detroit, or coming out, because they're painting thousands and thousands and millions of cars a year. Anything they can do to reduce their environmental impact is a good thing, but they're in very controlled situations because water-based paints are.
The water-based paints have gotten so good now that actually, seasoned painters that have been doing it for 30, 40 years actually really love this stuff because, it is, basically, stupid proof. You can walk in the booth and shoot this stuff. It isn't the old lacquers where you got to have like an agitator cup on your siphon feed where you got to be constantly agitating to keep the metallics suspended in there as you're spraying. The new water-based paints are, really gotten really good. The only thing that is holding that whole system back is they don't have like a water-based clear coat.
So in other words, it's a base coat clear coat system. The base coat is still a color. It's still water-based. It will, when it dries, it's not going to come off if you touch it, but it still needs to be clear coated to protect the base coat. And all of the clear coats are still solvent based. So you're just eliminating solvent from one step. the actual color coat part of it. I'm not aware of a water-based primer.
No,
I have not.
I've never heard
I've
anything
never
about
heard.
that yet.
Now we may, just
I
because.
could be dead wrong.
Yeah, we could
They
be
could
wrong.
exist.
They might be out there. We're just not aware of them. For the most part, I'm aware of water-based for clear coat or for color coat only, and then you still have to clear over it with a solvent clear, and you're still using salt. So it just eliminates it from
Some of
one
the
phase.
isocyanates from, depleting the ozone layer.
Yeah. So it's. I would say, if you want, at some point, it probably may be the way of the future. It may be the kind of thing where maybe you want to try it or learn some more about it. I've heard there are some, they tend to be more uh, touchy as far as humidity in the air and temperature, and you need a certain amount of air exchange in the booth. Uh, for the pros, where they got control of everything, temperature, humidity, air exchange, everything, that's a good thing. For the guy in the home shop, maybe it's not. I don't know. For me, it's not the best choice yet. I'm sure Gary would jump on it before I did.
6 of one, half a dozen of another. It's like I don't have enough experience painting complete cars, with or any experience painting a car with water base outside of a booth.
Let's see. Jesse writes, building a fun machine based on what I was able to find. He's got a 1935 Hudson Terraplane. That's a neat car. The car used a lot of wood for framing, and I know the frame. I'm sure you mean the inner body structure, not the frame itself. The frame itself would be steel, and it is mostly rotted. Yeah. Not looking to restore to original, but as a fun driver that looks cool. Any suggestions on replacing the wood structures with fabricated metal would be appreciated. He's planning on putting it on an S10 frame. That is as close to original frame size. That is close to the original frame size. Car had no frame when he got it. Okay, so it just got a body. Yeah, S10 frame is not a bad choice. It's a narrow frame. A lot of guys with 30s cars tend to gravitate to the S10 frames for easy,
We
because
know
you
a
have
lot about wood frame bodies around here. His
we
35 is wood framed, and that's still wood framed. My International is a wood frame body where it's cut decks, where the sheet metal is secured to either oak or an ash wooden frame, and that's all gone. Your cheapest alternative to restructure the body would be pick up some steel tubing and uh, you know sawzall blade, or and just start making pie cuts and welding it till it fits or contours the shape you're looking for. And I've seen guys build the entire structure of bodies on like 35 Chevrolets, where it was a wood core body,
Mhm.
and then they come back in and then stitch weld the original sheet metal to the tubing frame. But if you have enough of the wood there holding the body together, it makes life easier, where you just take one piece of the rotted wood out and then you start shaping your tubing
Yeah,
to
and
get
that's
it to fit into there.
and that's not to say you have to duplicate all of the wood pieces with metal. Metal gives you a little bit different flexibility, but there's things like your hinge posts and door posts and things where you've got like stuff coming together, and when the doors open, that part is exposed. That you want those contours and shapes to resemble, to
Yeah,
have
you
the
want
shape,
the doors to open and close,
but
obviously.
for the most part, on most 30s car, there's nothing, that wood doesn't necessarily go out and ride right against the door, right against the skin. The skin was just sort of a structure that was put over to, give it the style, the inner wood shapes a lot of that can be simplified and made to work with, your car. Things that can get a little take a little bit of work, or things like window tracks and channels. Sometimes those are in the wood, and you have to go back and duplicate a channel to actually have a track to put your window channels into,
That glass that rolls
and
up and down.
and stuff like, yeah, all those kinds of things. It takes it's not a quick and easy project, but you'll find a lot of street rods, a lot of older, Chevy GM cars up until 1936 were all wood bodied. uh, in 1936, they started late 1936, some of 35, 36 Chevys, parts of them were metal, parts of them were wood. By 1937, all of GM had switched over. Ford and Mopar switched over earlier than that. The But it's still, depending on the year car you're working. Then some of the other brands, some of the off brands like the Hudsons and stuff, they kept the wood for quite a while. There's even cars into the 40s that still had wood framing. That's what that is a holdover from when they used to build carriages before they actually had engines and stuff in them. That's how they built carriages that would be drawn by horses. So that, they knew what they knew from what they used to do. Um, so that's how that acquired. Um, my recommendation is, yeah, just go ahead and start. There's not an easy, simple way to do it. If it would, everybody
Yeah,
would
there'd be
be
a lot
buying
more
those
of them.
30s GM cars. But the easiest way to do it is just start setting things up, and start on getting your doorpost solid, and then start hanging your doors and get that stuff so it's aligned. Then you can start building out the rest of your structure. What do you think?
Yeah.
We have a Jeff on Facebook. Sorry, Jeff, I accidentally missed this one. Got a flathead 6 and is 49. He's changing everything to 12 volt. Anything to watch out for? Uh, in making uh, a 6 volt to 12 volt conversion, things you got to watch out for. Well, of course, you got to change all your bulbs to 12 volt. Um, assume there you can get your starter will work. Your 6 volt starter will work on 12 volts. It and I've done this on many cars for years. The 6 volt stuff tends to be really heavy wound, lots of copper and everything else, and they'll spin faster on 12 volts. I don't recommend using any voltage restriction on them. Things that you do have to watch out for is like your fuel gauge. Your fuel gauge is 6 volt. They probably don't make a 12 volt converted sender unit, but you can go to like Napa Auto Parts, or one of the auto parts stores, and get a voltage restrictor that'll knock your 6 volt down to 12 volt. And the reason this works is your fuel gauge is only reading resistance to ground, and you can knock the voltage down and have it not affect the readings, because it's still measuring your resistance to ground. So having the switch to from 12 volt to 6 volt generally does not affect the gauge reading, but it does allow you to maintain the original sender unit. Some things don't really matter when you switch them over. A lot of times, if you have like a floor mount dimmer switch, a lot of times those work 6 or 12 volt just fine. Starters work fine. Usually your generator, you're going to have to switch that over to like an alternator. Better off with an alternator anyways, because a generator at idle does not generate electricity. So a lot of guys will start up the car, let it run for a while, and find out that their battery's not dead. if they have a generator, where an alternator is efficient enough to actually charge your battery or maintain the charge with it just idling. Um, so, things like, horns, you want to put voltage restrictors on because a lot of times those can't make the jump. Um, Radios, of course, if you've got a 6-volt radio or anything, there isn't a lot of electronics in a 49 or Plymouth, but you do want to make sure those things, sometimes like heater fans, defroster fans, items like this. You can put a voltage limiter into inline that'll knock it from 12 to 6, and then you can keep the old stuff. It's always a good idea. Check around too. There's a lot of going from a 6 to a 12 volt conversion is popular. So there are a lot of like upgraded 12 volt components for a lot of cars. If including things like fuel senders and stuff like that. So it's a lot. It pays to check around, check with the year, make of your car, see if you can see if somebody makes 12 volt components for that. So there are a few things you got to look out, but for the most part, you'll find it's a good investment. It just having driven 6-volt cars and 12-volt cars, the 12-volt cars just start so much easier, and and if you run into any problems, you're not looking for somebody to jump you with a 6-volt battery because that can be its own sort of heck. All right, Tony on Facebook asks, I'm restoring a 1982 Dodge D150, shark bed with a slant 6. Hard to find parts. Any suggestions? Oh, Tony, you're in that like no man's land. There's always a period with almost any car where they're between where the aftermarket manufacturers start to embrace them and make parts for them, and where the supply of new parts runs out. So there's kind of like a dead zone in there. And
Yeah, we're talking the 80s here. A lot of these cars went to the seal scrapper and got crushed. So availability is.
But but not all of them get crushed. What I would say is looking for parts. If you're looking for used parts or good used parts, car-part.com is a good source. That is basically a nationwide listing of all the auto parts places.
Salvage yards.
And you can type in 1982 Dodge D150 and if you wanted to, you can search the whole North American continent. It lets you do really broad searches or really narrow searches to within 20 miles of your house, for that matter. So it's a good app, good place to go when you're looking for used parts. I found parts for 1960s cars in there, 1930s cars even sometimes. So it's a good app to use. There's salvage yards out there. They list, their parts. There'd be some parts that are, in most salvage yards, like interior trim parts. Salvage yards don't list those.
Right. So
but
if you call or sometimes they let you walk out the yard.
But if you want to find out if they have one, you can like search for like a door or or a cab and then you can find out if a yard near you has a 82 D150. Then you can go, yeah, they've got one, and then go to the yard or give them a call and say, hey, I see you got a 82 D150. Do you have this trim panel inside? They may either say, just come out and take a look, or they'll actually send somebody out to take a look. It depends on the yard. Every yard's different. Kind of respect their rules. And most of them are more than happy to help you out as long as you show them a little bit of respect. Teresa's back. Speaking of TIG welding, do you use your dominant hand to hold the TIG say, your right hand and hold your fill wire with your left?
I do. You know, whichever eye is dominant for you is like I know guys that are left eye dominant, but their right hand did. They'll hold the torch in their other hand. It's just whatever you're comfortable with. So for me, yes, I use my right hand. I'm right-handed when I'm writing, but I use that to hold the torch because the distance you're holding the torch away from the metal is how much amperage you're actually sticking into the panel. If you can keep that as consistent as possible, it's going to let you lay down as consistent and tiny of a weld bead as necessary, and that's what you're trying to avoid is too much heat. So I'm holding the torch with my right hand. I'm feeding the rod with my left.
Okay, we're good. Next, we're moving on to PMC Partland. Let's see. Tips on replacing the rear main seal without removing the engine. Oh man, yeah,
Well, you got a fun one.
yeah. Uh, it's a Chevy small block manual trans. And then my page jumped here. Manual trans thing. Um, this can be a pain. Is it possible? Yeah. I know guys who have been able to, of course, small block Chevy, you got to take the dang timing cover off to get the oil pan off, or no, it's the other way. So okay, the small block Chevy, if you can drop the pan, get that out of the way. 99% of the time, nobody can do that because you got cross member linkage and
then you got
everything else that's
in
the way. But if you can get the pan down and out of the way, it's going to make the job 10 times easier. If you have the older style rope rear main seal, it's a real pain to get those suckers out and back in again without, you know,
without having an engine stand.
Yeah, without the engine out of with the crank still in place. If you have a two-piece seal, it's a lot easier. A lot of times you can, if you can get the old seal out, you can just, kind of lube it up and roll the new one in there, and push out the old seal. Um, and the one piece seals, it's sort of like you end up having to take the tranny down anyways to install those. Yeah, it is. Is it possible? Yes, it's possible on any of them to replace the rear main seal on a small block Chevy. It first you got to foremost get your tranny pan out of the way. In some situations, you may run into so much trouble that you end up having to loosen all your main caps just a little bit to buy you a little bit of room. I don't like doing it that way, but I have done it that way. Most of the time, you can just remove your rear main cap and get the seal in. Um, I say that knowing I need to replace one on this red car, and I've been ignoring that. So, yes. Can it be done? Yes. Is there a good tip I can give you? If it's a two-piece rear main, the easiest way is to, the bottom part is going to come out with the bottom cap. Sometimes when they build the engine, they'll have the seal slightly clocked so it doesn't line up with the actual split line on the cap. Yeah, that can actually help you out, make it a little easier to pull the old one out. Yeah, I'd like to say there's one silver bullet, but every time I do it, it's like I end up with like a new surprise. So, I have this is from our guest. I have a 1953 Chevrolet pickup that I haven't moved in some time. What's new, huh? Recently, I've got one with trees going through it. Recently I moved, and when I tried to use my brakes, It seemed as the master cylinder was dry. Can hot weather cause brake system to go dry? No. Do you have any ideas on how to cure this problem? Brake system is a closed system. If you run out of fluid, you have a leak. Uh, that's it. Period. I know I've run into people that say, "Oh yeah, it was so it's been so hot or it's been so long that the brake fluid evaporated out of there." No, brake fluid does not evaporate out of a closed system. There's a vent hole in some systems, but that's not going to allow brake fluid to evaporate out. What happens is over time, just a little bit seeps past, things
Right.
like the
Weeping out of the
wheel
wheel cylinders,
cylinders or the caliper seals or brake hose fittings or
flex
master
lines.
master cylinder, back of the master cylinder. There's just a million little places where a little bit will leak from time to time. Um, so over time, especially if the car's been sitting for a long time, you hop in it and bam, there's no brakes,
Yeah, pedal goes to the floor.
and basically what's happened is all your fluid has leaked out. It doesn't mean it's a bad leak. Does it mean that it may be that if you just add, it's such a slow leak that it would take months to.
Yeah, you're not just driving it down the street, but you're just trying to move it from garage stall
Yeah.
to garage stall. Pour
Sometimes,
some fluid in.
yeah, sometimes you can add some fluid and you're fine for, I had this 31 back here, I had like a bunch of little leaks in that, and it would be you top off the master cylinder, you drive all season long, and then, when you went in it the next spring and then you hit the brake pedal and it would go right to the floor and you go, where all brake fluid go? Yeah, we know where it went. It leaked out somewhere. So either you have to repair the leaks or just find out exactly how quickly it's leaking.
Fill it up with fluid. Take a look at the floor, see where it's squirting out.
The Joe writes, when welding butt welds on the floor, what size MIG wire should I use? And at what voltage on the welder?
Every welder is a little bit different. There you got, like the larger Millers and Lincolns where they got digital readouts. That, there's a little um, wire guide and chart on the inside of any newer welder. If it's something that came out of the 60s, yeah, you're not going to have that. You're going to have to find something online. But some of them are numbered or lettered. So, again, you kind of, just as a baseline, just start with, an even, and especially, where you're matching the wire speed and the heat. If you just have the two dials set up on older welders, that's just a good baseline to start. As far as sheet metal, I'd use 023 wire. Make sure you have the correct 023 wire contact tip in the torch. And, you can use 30 thousandths. 35 thousandths starts getting to be a little too big, and you're putting too much wire, too much heat to a sheet metal floor pan. I don't know if you're butt welding or if you're lap welding.
He said he was butt welding, and then that was my first thought was, why is he butt welding? Because most floors have lap weld, uh, and it's kind of a strength, and plus they also like do seam sealers and everything.
Yeah, I'm thinking that he bought
he might have a patch panel or something that he wants to butt weld in and make it look factory or whatever. And in which case, that's perfectly fine to butt weld them. We butt welded some floor stuff before, even MIG welded it. But yeah, it's just a matter of keeping the heat down, so you're not as worried on floor pans if you get a little warp. But usually there's so much structure in floor pans that with ribs and everything else that you don't have to worry as much with warping. But it can still come back and haunt you.
Yeah, and if you're trying to do like an exact butt weld, and you evenly space out your tacks, if you start like welding on one corner and you got like the bottom part of a foot wheel well or a pant and where you're welding, tack it all the way around. Don't start welding at one side and then by the time you get over to the other side, you're a mile off because everything's moving as you're applying heat to it.
Yep. And I think that's a big distinct people got to learn is when they're welding on sheet metal. Sheet metal can move around a lot, and you don't see it until you're all done, and then the panel does this, and it's there. You think your first thought is, how did that get warped out there in the middle? And it's not really warped in the middle. It's just that the edge here, way over here, shrunk a little bit, and that's like it wrinkled the metal, and it caused that to warp way out there. Where actually the problem is just a small area over here. So
doing it, stitch, and space your tacks about an inch apart. But when you first start tacking, it's fine to throw a tack 8 inches away and then just slowly close up the gaps where you're about an inch tack and then try to keep it down to an inch weld or just stitch weld the whole thing together.
Okay, on your right, what was your first classic car you ever owned? Well, I'm old enough that my first classic car was just my first car. It was a 63 Impala two-door hardtop. It was a beautiful car, a lot of fond memories. And what was yours, Gare? Well, now you're old enough now. Your first cars were big classic.
95 Camaro.
And that was a fine car too. Yeah, I think every guy has a few fond memories of their first car, and that goes without saying. I think the first car that I bought that was just purely a classic as a second car was a 1940 Chevy Coupe. I acquired the car when I was 16, and I owned it for 6 months before I told my dad I owned it. So I managed to store it at friends' garages for 6 months, and then then winter came and I had to come clean. Okay. Since floor pan welding questions came, what's your method for removing undercoating from cars?
Ooh, that's a fun one.
Yeah.
Scraping if it's good, dry, and brittle. Other than that, if it's like fresh undercoating, you may have to, grab out your little butane or propane torch and warm up the other side of the panel and scrape the goo off. Things like you want to get as much of that stuff off before you grab like your rust and paint stripper wheel, the hamburger wheel, or a wire wheel to try because that will just load up and you'll be slinging this hot goo everywhere. Your best bet is to scrape as much of it off as possible. And if it's good and dry and brittle, like you're talking about something from the 1970s and it was the factory undercoating, I mean, that stuff just chisel right off. But if you found something that's been recently squirted, or it's got a fresh coat of bright, shiny new undercoating under it, you may need to use a little heat to get it removed.
Yeah, and when I know, like even the 57 DeSoto here, doing 57, rather than make all the panels fit right, they used to go in and they didn't have any real sound control. So as a means to seal up the car and also get sound control, they used to just annihilate the inside of the car with like a thick, heavy kind of undercoating. And inside this red one, every square inch of the floor, the roof, the trunk pan, every square inch inside that car was covered with the thick undercoating
Quarter
stuff.
inch of undercoat.
We probably, because we wanted to get the whole car to bare metal, it meant a lot of times with a propane or a torch or a heat gun and a scraper. And you would heat up an area and scrape, and heat up an area and scrape, and heat up an area and scrape. You don't apply so much heat as to warp panels, but you apply enough to soften the material. What a mind-numbing, long, tedious task that was. But the end result is now we have a impeccably clean area. No, we didn't restore all that.
Another thing is if you're going to send it off to the blaster, scrape all that stuff off before you send it because they're not going to dig
the,
that stuff
the
out.
media blasting, if you have your car sandblasted or media blasted, when the media hits that stuff, it just bounces off. It absorbs the impact and bounces off. So the media blaster can't blast that area
It
down to
won't
bare
cut
metal,
through it.
and so they'll like just say, it is what it is. So if you do want to get your car completely blasted to bare metal, all that stuff has to be off before you send it to the blaster, unless you're going to pay the
Same
blaster
thing
an
with seam
arm and a leg,
sealer.
I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah, seam sealer is the same thing, and a lot of cars with the seams. A lot
Some
of
of
times you
them
get your
get,
car back
excessive,
from the media blaster, and
and
all
you
the
see all the
seam sealer is
seams.
still on there, and all the so then you have to go back and do a lot of handwork. From Michael on Facebook. Hi, I have a 73 Pontiac Ventura that sat for 10 years in a shed in Arizona desert. Have you used engine flush to clean varnish? I have already installed new fuel tank. That's a good idea. Previous owner did some work, carb rebuild, etc. Sounds like lifter click after the engine shut down. Oh, it has a Pontiac 350. It's a good motor. I have already installed the new. Yes, new fuel tank. Yeah, I could see where the lifters might start. Starting. There are things you can do to. I've never. My one experience with an engine flush did not end well. I did do an engine flush on a '78 F100 at one point, and it ended up with me rebuilding the engine. So that didn't work quite well. But I know there's a lot of guys that like to add, especially on engines that have sat for a long time. They like to use like either the Marvel Mystery Oil or the Sea Foam, stuff like that, and run it for a little bit and clean out some of that stuff. Don't I would say, yeah, go ahead, try it. If you've got like some lifter click, your lifters may be stuck because they've been in one position for, however many years it was. So there's probably some dried oil or oil varnish and stuff like that in the engine. What do you got to lose by trying it at that point? Try some stuff like the sea foams or mystery oils, or, if it doesn't work, just go in knowing that it's
They
potentially
need to be rebuilt.
you may need to or replace your lifters, or you may need to do something else other than just adding an additive to it. Um, but yeah, usually it's things like lifters that get stuck, or because they've been in one position for months and months and years on end. Um, let's see, moving down. I have a 60 sedan delivery, and I'm trying to convert to power steering using the GM 605 box. But my Borgeson joint 30 spline end won't fit onto the output shaft. Is it a 30 spline shaft again? Let's see, it's got a 60. Has been the bane of my existence. Uh, and you're going to have to forgive me. I can't recall offhand without looking up some reference materials, and I can come back and see if I can find an answer for you. Um, Usually the guys at Bargeson are more than happy to help you out with this kind of stuff. I know Alan over there, and great guy, great company, solid company to work with. Uh, I would probably start by talking to them. Contact the guys over at Borgeson, tell them exactly what you're running into, because a lot of times they'll have a joint, a universal conversion joint that will help you connect dissimilar things together and can help you work through the process. But yeah, that when it comes to universal joints and Borgeson boxes and stuff like that, those guys at Borgeson really know their stuff. So, it's worth checking out with them. Um, oh, and I've forgotten until now. Uh, and I'm not sure, is it on here, Katie? I'm getting a prompt from our great producer. Down here below, there's a box now that I've assembled a 66 tips for car restores. You should download that because I spent a lot of time putting that together. And, I'd appreciate it. It's like it's free, and anything's free is worth what you're paying for it. So I've assembled a 66 tips for car restorers. Some of the, and basically it's a lot of suggestions from car restorers across the country, and I think they've got some at least some great ideas. There's some great nuggets in there that'll not only make your time in the shop more useful. It'll also save you some time and maybe some money too. Um, let's see. Teresa writes. Teresa, back. Another question. Great. Thank you, Teresa. At the end of the drip rails, rear windows on a 64 Le Mans, noted for rusting out. Okay. There are half a dozen pinhole size 16 to a quarter spot about 2.5 inches in diameter. Replace the metal? Yuck. Or can I get by with some USC all metal sand and then fill with gold rage? Well, the all metal is water resistant. The all metal will, how long do you want to own the car, Teresa?
Leveling seam sealer, if that floats into there and you can level it off,
yeah. And there's some things you can, if you can get to the backside too, and use like seam sealer in the backside to help seal up the backside. Can you cheat it? Yeah, you can cheat it. The all metal you can go. I know guys that will I'm not a big fan of fiberglass and on steel because a lot of times it'll break that bond breaks down over in time, unless it's completely encapsulated kind of thing. Another, the ideally, he could they could also lead it for that matter.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and if you go to a company like Eastwood sells a product, they sell all the tools and all the stuff to actually do lead work. Back before Bondo, back before all metal and stuff like that. All body work was done with lead. It's a matter of putting a flux on and using a propane torch and filling the holes with lead and then filing it smooth. And then the great thing about lead is not affected by water. Water, it won't pop if it gets wet.
Right, it expands, it contracts at the same rate as sheet metal, so it's not evident that you got 6 feet of Bondo in it.
Yep, all the old school customizers would have filled that with lead without thinking about it. They would have, filled it in, and then maybe, then once you got the lead close and you've got all the holes filled up, you can always put a skim coat of the Rage or whatever your body filler of choice is to, do the final smooth out. So, yeah, there's ways around it. I know what you're up to, Teresa. So, yeah, there are ways around it. Could you get by with the all metal? Yeah, maybe it'll work. But if you're going to be painting the whole car, take a little bit more time and make sure that 2 years down the line, you're not walking by your car and going, "Geez, it popping back out again on me."
Cut loose on you.
Yeah, because that's really kind of been there, done that kind of thing. If you had a choice between planishing hammer versus English wheel, what would you buy? You've used both quite a bit.
Planishing hammer all day. If you're gonna buy a planishing hammer, you can work with such a small item. If you're just looking to stretch large panels, and that's not always the case, but if you're just looking to take a couple dents out of a inner wheel tub or something where you're just gonna work in a small area, planishing hammer will let you do that. The English wheel will not. If you're trying to make roof skins or door skins, it's big panels, then you want to go with the English wheel where you can cover a lot of area quick. But as far as cars go, there's so many little nooks and crannies and little pieces and stuff like that where the planishing hammer is the route I would go with what to buy.
Yep, and with the right dies, you can get crowns on. You can
Oh, yeah,
you
you
can
can get
you can
crowny
work into
dies
you
on-
can work into crowns and build like yeah. If you were gonna do a big whole roof skin, you would want to use an English wheel so you can move a lot of metal over a big area without causing. But if you just wanted to like crown a small panel or something, the planching hammer can work really well for that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we have a nice thank you. Oh, you're welcome. Let's see, guest. Just to follow up, you did contact Bargain. They really couldn't help me, as they said their 30 spline joint should fit the 30 spline shaft. Interesting. I'm not sure I have offhand. I'm not sure I have. You could try contacting companies like Flaming River. They're the other big joint manufacturer. The and the only other thought is my mind is you're saying the steering shaft itself, it doesn't fit on your 30 spline steering shaft. I'm not sure why that. I'm sure the Borgeson joint fits a Borgeson box, but I'm not sure why it wouldn't fit a 30 spline shaft unless there was like a different diameter or something.
Or a master key spline on there.
Yeah, or sometimes they have like one tooth that's like a double tooth, and it's like in one place on all those splines where it's like a fatter, so it indexes to that spot. It'd be worth checking out. You may need to modify something to get it to work. But yeah,
if it's on a rag joint, I've seen where you cannibalize the
Or you
factory.
Take two different rag joints and make one to work, because then you can, because a rag joint it's like a universal joint, but it uses that big disc of rubber material in it. And yeah, I've seen cases where people have, used a rag joint from one car, half of it from one car and half of it from another, and assembled them together
to make it work.
So it can be done. Teresa, yes, you're welcome, Teresa. Thank you. You can get from the backside, good, seal it up, and that way, if you can seal the backside, you won't have to worry about moisture getting in there. And that's in a spot where, at the end of that drip rail on the 64 Le Mans, it's not a lot of moisture coming from the backside anyways. Show that we have the first ever CCR Classic Car Show. Yes, I did kind of mention that. We do have coming up next week. Gary's going to come back. We're going to have our first, virtual car show. All things virtual nowadays. Looking forward to that. I saw some of the early submission. That should be fun. I'll have to try to convince Gary to not be too opinionated. Eureka. Eureka. The output shaft on the steering box does have a double tooth. So, yeah, that's an indexing thing, and sometimes if you do have one double tooth spline,
you can file one tooth off the inside of the coupler.
You can sometimes modify that one tooth on your spline fitting. I have, just know that that's your problem, and that's what you got to work to fix. If you notify Uh, if you notify your joint, whoever you're getting your, whether it be Borgeson, maybe they've got it now that you know what the problem is. Uh, Maybe they have a joint that will allow you to index it. A lot of them don't, though. I've seen that where either they'll guys will either grind that double tooth, notch that double tooth so it will allow that uh,
I just would
joint to slide on.
modify the coupler. Just know that the second you do that, you can't return it.
So yeah, and that's kind of like a lot of hot rodding stuff is what it's going to break down to is uh, making stuff work. And by upgrading boxes, sometimes the components you have don't always work. I do know they make rag joints and stuff like that with the double tooth notch in it, and that's so they indexed it. And that the reason for that is so if it had to come apart and go back, everything, all the parts would index together, and your car would still, your steering would still be close or whatever. But it makes it a pain for on in some applications.
Retrofitting
Yeah,
parts
when you're
to
trying to fit things together, and now you've got to deal with this indexing tooth there. Uh, the it's a pain, but you can overcome that stuff. And okay, we're at the top of the hour. Before we go, okay, I put a lot of work into down below here is the sign up for the tips thing. Before you go, click on there, download that. Tell me what you think about it next time. If you have any questions that came out of that, these are all like different tips that, it took me a little while to get these together from different guys throughout the country. If you got some of your own tips, heck, we can, we might introduce, bringing, adding to this in the future. So, um, I want to thank everyone for joining me here today. And again, we'll be back again next month. We're slowly upgrading our systems here. We almost had it all upgraded. We got a little bit better camera in our laptop this time. We got one more question. Let's see if we can quick get this in. Fixing and restoring a 57 two-door hardtop. I know that I want overhaul the engine and replace the bushings, etc. Should I start removing all the hood and fenders to get to everything else? Yeah, why not? If you know you're going to replace the engine, you're going to rebuild the whole car. Yeah, you can. I would caution you if you're going to work. Kind of limit how because cars can take up a lot more space when you blow them completely apart. Suddenly, a one-car garage you need like a four-car garage by the time you get it all apart. But kind of limited if you're going to be working in the front end. Yeah, take your front fenders and hood and grill off. Work on your engine.
It's going to make life a lot easier if you're replacing front end bushings or pulling the engine versus trying to get it out through the narrow opening with the tranny attached. Yeah. All that stuff on both sides.
And then once you get everything sealed up there, then you can always, get your can hang your fenders and stuff back on the car and work on aligning some of that stuff, and then move on, and maybe do rear suspension or gas tank and stuff in the back. Just avoid, completely blowing up a car if you don't need to, because then it takes up.
Yeah, don't do the coffee can restoration. Label and bag and tag. Don't stick every nut and bolt for the entire front end in one coffee can, because then you sit there scratching your head.
All right. Thanks, guys, for coming out today. Really appreciate it. It's been a great session. You guys all had great questions. We're looking forward to talking to you again next month. We also have the car show, our virtual car show next week. Stop by for that too. It should be fun. We're going to keep Gary kind of toned down so he's like not too critical. And if you have any more, you have any questions, have them ready, and we'll be ready to answer them next time. And from that, be safe and get out there, enjoy the hobby as much as you can. Go on a nice cruise, take your car out, go for a nice ride, even if it's not your classic car. Get out and enjoy the weather, enjoy, some of the car events that are happening and some of the parades, some of the things. And I know in some places we're actually talking about having car shows soon too. So we'll see what happens. Number one, be safe. We want to see you back here next month.